The golden sunset painted the sky as Maya rushed through the heavy glass doors of Le Blanc's restaurant, quickly fixing her black apron strings. Her footsteps echoed across the marble floor as she hurried to clock in for her evening shift. She couldn't afford to be late tonight, not when the restaurant was hosting its biggest event of the year. The usual smell of fresh bread and sautéed garlic filled the air, but tonight it mixed with the sweet scent of fresh flowers that decorated every corner. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, their light dancing off the freshly polished silverware on each perfectly set table. Maya's heart beat a little faster as she watched the staff scurrying around, making last-minute preparations for the symphony orchestra fundraiser. "Just made it," she whispered to herself, quickly tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. At 24, Maya had mastered the art of juggling multiple jobs to help care for her grandmother, who had raised her since she was little. But this serving job at Le Blanc was special. It paid better than most, and sometimes, on quiet evenings, she could hear beautiful music drifting from the baby grand piano in the corner. The piano. Maya's eyes drifted toward it as she tied her apron. It stood proud and gleaming, recently polished for tonight's special event. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering the feel of ivory keys beneath them. 3 years had passed since she'd had to leave music school, her dreams of becoming a concert pianist packed away with her music sheets and competition medals. The scholarship money had run out, and with her grandmother's medical bills piling up, there hadn't been much choice. "Maya, table assignments are being handed out," called her coworker from the service station. She quickly grabbed her notepad and pen, hurrying over to join the other servers. The restaurant manager stood before them, looking more stressed than usual. "Listen up, everyone," he announced, adjusting his tie. "Tonight isn't just any fundraiser. We have the entire board of the city symphony here, along with some of our biggest donors. These people think nothing of dropping thousands on a single bottle of wine, so I need your absolute best service." Maya nodded along with the others, but her attention kept drifting to the fragments of conversations she could hear from the arriving guests. They spoke of composers she knew by heart, of performances she'd once dreamed of giving. A familiar ache filled her chest, but she pushed it aside. She had bills to pay and tables to serve. As she began preparing the water service for her assigned section, she couldn't help but notice the way the wealthy patrons entered. The women in designer dresses that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The men in tailored suits discussing million-dollar donations like pocket change. Yet there was something different about tonight's crowd. Their eyes lit up when they talked about music, and their hands moved expressively as they discussed their favorite symphonies. These weren't just rich people showing off. They genuinely loved the art that had once been her whole world. The evening was young, but already Maya could feel something special in the air. Maybe it was the way the piano seemed to call to her from across the room, or perhaps it was the excited chatter of the upcoming performances. Whatever it was, she had no idea that this ordinary shift was about to become anything but ordinary. She straightened her shoulders, picked up her serving tray, and stepped into the dining room. The crystal glasses clinked softly as she walked, creating their own quiet melody. Little did she know, fate had planned a symphony of its own for her tonight. The dining room hummed with conversation as Maya moved between tables, refilling water glasses and taking drink orders. Her comfortable black shoes, bought specially for long shifts, barely made a sound on the polished floor. Every few steps, she caught fragments of conversations that made her heart skip a beat. "Did you hear the Royal Symphony's latest recording of Beethoven's Fifth?" asked a woman in a sparkly blue dress, gesturing with her wine glass. The tempo in the first movement was absolutely perfect. Maya's fingers instinctively tapped against her serving tray. Tap, 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 tap. The famous rhythm that every music student knew by heart. She quickly caught herself and stopped, but not before an elderly gentleman at the next table noticed. "You know Beethoven?" he asked kindly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oh, just a little," Maya replied softly, placing a basket of fresh bread on his table. She didn't mention that she'd played that symphony dozens of times, late at night in practice rooms that smelled of chalk dust and dedication. She didn't tell him how she used to conduct along with recordings while cooking dinner in her tiny kitchen, using a wooden spoon as a van. As she headed back to the service station, she passed the baby grand piano that seemed to grow more magnificent with each glance. The lid was propped open, revealing strings that gleamed like gold in the chandelier light. Her hands almost tingled with the memory of playing similar pianos in recital halls, back when her dreams had seemed within reach. The pianist should be here any minute. Maya overheard the event coordinator telling the restaurant manager. He's going to demonstrate the piano before the auction. We're hoping to raise enough money to fund 3 full scholarships for young musicians. Scholarships. Maya remembered the day she'd lost hers, how her hands had shaken as she read the letter, explaining that due to budget cuts, her funding couldn't be renewed. She'd been halfway through her program, maintaining perfect grades while working part-time. But perfect grades couldn't pay tuition. Between tables, Maya found herself humming quietly. Music had a way of sneaking out of her, like water finding cracks in a dam. She'd catch herself tapping rhythms on the coffee maker during slow afternoons or working out fingerings for piano pieces while folding napkins. 3 years of serving hadn't erased 15 years of musical training. Would you prefer the salmon or the chicken? She asked a guest, her notepad ready. As she waited for the answer, her eyes drifted to the man's cufflinks, tiny silver grand pianos that caught the light. She wondered if he played, or if he just loved music enough to wear it. The salmon, he replied, then turned back to his companion. As I was saying, finding real talent these days is nearly impossible. Everyone plays the notes, but where's the passion? Where's the soul? Maya bit her lip as she wrote down the order. She remembered her old teacher saying something similar. Music isn't in the notes, it's in the silence between them. That's where the magic lies. She'd understood that better after leaving music school. Now her whole life felt like that silence between notes, waiting for the next measure to begin. The evening grew busier as more guests arrived. Maya balanced plates with practiced ease, but her mind kept wandering to the piano. From certain tables, she could see her reflection in its polished surface, her neat uniform, her careful posture. But in her mind, she saw a different version of herself, wearing a concert dress, stepping onto a stage. She shook off the daydream and focused on her tasks. There were water glasses to fill, orders to take, tables to clear. Yet with each step through the dining room, the piano seemed to follow her with its quiet presence. Like an old friend waiting patiently to continue a conversation that had been interrupted years ago. The buzz of excitement in the room grew stronger as the time for the evening's musical program approached. Maya checked her watch. The pianist should have arrived by now. She glanced at the piano again, its keys visible and inviting, then forced herself to look away. She had a job to do, even if her heart was playing a very different tune. The first sign that something was wrong came when Maya noticed the event coordinator pacing near the entrance, phone pressed tightly to her ear. The woman's face had gone pale, and she kept checking her watch while shaking her head. What do you mean you can't make it? The coordinator whispered urgently into her phone, but not quietly enough to escape Maya's sharp ears as she passed with a tray of empty glasses. The auction starts in 40 minutes. Maya's stomach tightened as she connected the dots. The pianist still hadn't arrived. She glanced at the gleaming grand piano, sitting silent and waiting, then at the room full of donors who had come expecting an evening of music. We can't just cancel the performance, the restaurant manager said, running his hands through his hair. These people paid thousands per plate. The whole point was to demonstrate the piano before the auction. The coordinator hung up her phone, her hands trembling slightly. He's sick, really sick. Food poisoning. He can barely stand up, let alone play. She looked around the room desperately. Does anyone know another professional pianist who could get here in the next half hour? Maya watched as the staff shook their heads. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, like a drum beating out a warning. The wealthy guests were starting to notice something was amiss. Whispers spread from table to table, and the excitement in the room began to fade into concern. "I heard the pianist isn't coming," a woman in red velvet said to her table companion. "How disappointing. I was so looking forward to hearing that beautiful instrument played." Near the bar, two men from the symphony board were talking in low, worried voices. "This could seriously affect the donations," one said. "People came here expecting to see what their money would support." Maya carried a fresh bottle of wine to table 7, trying to keep her hands steady. As she poured, she couldn't help overhearing more conversations about the crisis. These people genuinely cared about music education. The scholarships they were hoping to fund could change lives, just like a scholarship had once changed hers, at least for a while. "Maybe we could stream something through the speakers," suggested one of the waiters during a quick gathering by the service station. The event coordinator looked horrified at the very idea. "This is a fundraiser for classical music education," she hissed. "We can't play recordings through speakers like it's background music at a coffee shop." The beautiful piano stood in its spotlight, keys exposed, strings waiting. Maya felt its presence like a physical pull. She knew every piece the original pianist had planned to play. The program was printed on the fancy menu cards she'd been serving all evening. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, Chopin's Fantasie Impromptu, pieces she had performed dozens of times. But that was 3 years ago. Her hands were different now, calloused from carrying trays instead of dancing across keys. What if she'd forgotten? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these important people? The coordinator was now close to tears, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "We needed this piano auction to fund the scholarship program. Without a performance, how will people know what they're bidding on?" Maya watched a young server comfort the coordinator, offering her a glass of water. The room's energy had shifted completely, the excited buzz of anticipation replaced by disappointed murmurs. She saw the restaurant manager looking at the piano with something like grief. These were people who believed in the power of music to change lives. They had come here ready to open their hearts and wallets to help young musicians chase their dreams. Dreams like the ones Maya had packed away 3 years ago. Dreams that still played in her mind like a beloved melody. She looked down at her serving uniform, then back at the piano. The spotlight above it seemed to grow brighter, like it was waiting for something, or someone. Maya felt her fingers twitch again, remembering the feel of cool keys beneath them. In her mind, she could hear her grandmother's voice. "Sometimes the biggest moments in life come disguised as impossible choices." Maya slipped into the quiet storage room, needing a moment to think. Her hands were shaking as she set down her serving tray and leaned against a shelf of clean tablecloths. The muffled sounds of the dining room crisis filtered through the door. Worried voices, disappointed sighs, the coordinator's increasingly desperate phone calls. "I could do it," she whispered to herself, then immediately shook her head. The last time she performed in public was that terrible day at the conservatory. She'd been preparing for a crucial recital when a letter arrived, announcing her scholarship had been cut. The memory of sitting at the piano that day, her vision blurring with tears as she tried to play through Chopin's Ballade No. 1, still made her stomach twist. Through the small window in the storage room door, she could see the piano waiting in its spotlight. It reminded her of early mornings at her grandmother's house, practicing on their old upright before school. Her grandmother would be in the kitchen making breakfast, humming along as Maya played. "Music isn't just about talent," she used to say. "It's about having the courage to share what's in your heart." But that was different. That was family. These people out there were some of the city's most important music patrons. What if she wasn't good enough? What if 3 years of serving tables had dulled her skills too much? She could already imagine their faces, pity, maybe even amusement, at the waitress who thought she could fill in for a professional pianist. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of clean linens and polished silverware surrounded her, so different from the wood and brass scents of a concert hall. Yet her fingers were moving anyway, playing silent melodies on the edge of her apron. Even now, music lived inside her, refusing to stay hidden. Through the door, she heard a child's voice. "But Mom, when is the music going to start?" The question hung in the air, full of innocent disappointment. Maya remembered being that age, pressing her nose against the glass outside fancy concert halls, dreaming of playing there someday. She pulled out her phone and looked at the background photo, a picture of her and her grandmother from 3 years ago, taken the day Maya had gotten this job. Her grandmother was smiling proudly, as if serving at an upscale restaurant was just as impressive as performing at Carnegie Hall. "Whatever you do," she always said, "do it with your whole heart." The sounds from the dining room grew more distressed. Maya heard the event coordinator say something about refunds, and the restaurant manager mentioning canceled donations. All those music scholarships that wouldn't be funded, all those kids like her who might have to give up their dreams. Her hands were steadier now as she straightened her uniform. She thought about the pieces on tonight's program. She played them hundreds of times, late at night in her tiny apartment after long shifts, her fingers finding the keys even when she was too tired to open her eyes. Music had been her companion through every struggle, every setback, every moment of doubt. What was worse? Taking a risk and possibly failing, or standing safely in the shadows while an opportunity to make a difference slipped away. Maya thought about all the times she told herself that leaving music behind was the responsible choice. But maybe being responsible didn't mean giving up. Maybe sometimes it meant having the courage to try again. She could hear her grandmother's voice in her head. Life doesn't always give you perfect moments. Sometimes you have to make them yourself. Maya straightened her shoulders and looked at her reflection in the small mirror by the door. She saw past the serving uniform to the musician underneath, the one who had never really gone away, the one who still had something to say. The coordinator's voice drifted through the door again. "We have 15 minutes before the auction is supposed to start." It was now or never. Maya's hand hovered over the door handle as her heart pounded out a rhythm that felt like both a warning and an invitation. Maya's hands trembled as she pushed open the storage room door. The dining room lights seemed brighter now, every step towards the event coordinator feeling like walking through a dream. Her heart was beating so loud she wondered if others could hear it. "Excuse me," she said softly, then had to clear her throat and try again. "Excuse me, I might be able to help." The coordinator turned, her eyes red-rimmed from stress. "Yes, what is it?" She barely looked at Maya, still clutching her phone and clipboard. Maya took a deep breath. "I can play the piano. I studied at the conservatory for 2 years before I had to leave." The words tumbled out quickly, before she could lose her nerve. "I know all the pieces in tonight's program." The coordinator blinked, really looking at her for the first time. "You're one of the servers," she said slowly, as if trying to make sense of it. "You play classical piano." "She does more than play," came a quiet voice. They'd both turned to see one of the older kitchen staff standing nearby. "I've heard her humming classical pieces while working. She knows her stuff." The restaurant manager joined them, his face a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Are you sure about this? These people?" He gestured at the dining room full of wealthy patrons. "I know who they are," Maya said, her voice steadier now. "And I know how important this fundraiser is. Please, let me try. What do you have to lose?" The coordinator exchanged glances with the manager. The whispers of disappointment from the dining room seemed to grow louder with each passing second. Finally, she nodded. Okay, we'll try, but we need to move quickly." Maya untied her apron with shaking fingers, folding it carefully and placing it on a nearby service stand. She ran her hands down her black uniform pants, wishing she had something more appropriate to wear. But maybe it was better this way. No pretense, no hiding who she was. "Do you need the music sheets?" the coordinator asked, already shuffling through her clipboard. Maya shook her head. I know them by heart. She played these pieces so many times in her tiny apartment, on a keyboard with broken keys, keeping her dreams alive one note at a time. As she walked towards the piano, she felt every eye in the room turning to her. The elegant guests who had been watching her serve their meals all evening now watched with mixed expressions of curiosity and doubt. She heard whispers, saw raised eyebrows, caught fragments of confused conversations. The coordinator quickly stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight change in our program tonight. She paused, clearly unsure how to explain the situation. One of our own staff members has kindly offered to demonstrate the piano for us. Maya reached the piano, her fingers trailing lightly over its polished surface. Up close, she could see her reflection in its gleaming black finish. A young woman in a server's uniform, about to either make a fool of herself or make magic happen. She adjusted the bench, muscle memory from countless performances taking over. The keys felt cool and smooth under her fingertips as she tested them quietly. The piano was perfectly in tune, its action responsive and light. It was so much better than her old keyboard at home, like trading in a bicycle for a sports car. The room had gone completely silent now. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her grandmother's words. When you play from your heart, people don't see what you're wearing or where you came from. They only feel what you feel. She opened her eyes and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. The spotlight felt warm on her skin, like sunshine on a spring morning. In that moment, she wasn't just a waitress about to play for wealthy donors. She was every person who had ever had to put their dreams on hold, every artist who had to work a different job to survive, every musician who kept playing even when no one was listening. Maya took a deep breath, lifted her hands, and prepared to play the first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The silence in the room felt electric with possibility. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata floated through the air like drops of rain on a quiet night. Maya's fingers moved gently across the keys, each note precise yet flowing naturally into the next. She could feel her shoulders relaxing as muscle memory took over, years of practice guiding her hands. Someone gasped softly in the audience. Maya didn't look up. She was lost in the music now, letting it wash over her like a familiar embrace. The piece she had played so many times in her tiny apartment sounded different here, on this magnificent piano. Each note rang clear and true, filling the elegant dining room with waves of sound. The gentle first movement gave way to the more passionate second, her hands moving faster now, weaving melodies together like threads in a tapestry. She had played this piece during her last recital at the conservatory, but this felt different. Back then, she had been trying to prove something. Tonight, she was simply sharing what she loved. As the final movement began, her fingers flew across the keys in a burst of energy and emotion. The piano responded to her touch like a living thing, each note perfectly clear even at this racing tempo. She could feel the music in her whole body now, in her breathing, in her heartbeat, in the way she swayed slightly with the rhythm. When the last notes of the sonata faded away, the silence in the room was absolute. Maya finally looked up, her heart pounding. The faces before her were transformed. Gone were the polite, distant expressions of wealthy donors. Instead, she saw genuine emotion, some people wiping away tears, others sitting forward in their chairs with expressions of wonder. Without pausing, she began Chopin's Fantasie Impromptu. Her grandmother had always said this piece sounded like butterflies dancing, and Maya let that image guide her fingers. The delicate notes sparkled in the air, building into powerful chords that made the piano sing. A gentleman in the front row closed his eyes, smiling as she played. She recognized him as someone whose water glass she had refilled earlier. Now he was nodding in time with the music, his hand conducting tiny movements in the air. Near him, the woman in the blue dress who had been discussing Beethoven earlier was watching Maya's hands with amazement. The piece grew more intense, and Maya felt herself smiling as her fingers raced through the challenging middle section. All those early mornings practicing before her shifts, all those late nights playing on her old keyboard with half-broken keys, it had all led to this moment. She wasn't just playing notes on a page, she was telling her story through the music. As she moved into the final piece of the program, she caught a glimpse of the event coordinator standing near the wall, tears streaming down her face. The restaurant manager stood beside her, shaking his head in disbelief. Other servers had stopped their work to listen, standing quietly at the edges of the room. Maya poured everything she had into the final piece, all her hopes, her struggles, her dreams that refused to die. The music swelled and soared, filling every corner of the room. She thought of her grandmother, imagining her proud smile. She thought of her younger self, practicing scales and dreaming of moments like this. Time seemed to stop as she played the final passages. Her fingers danced across the keys with confidence and grace, drawing out every bit of beauty the piano had to offer. The last notes rang out, pure and clear, hanging in the air like stars. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The silence was complete. Then the room erupted. The applause started like a thunderclap, growing into a storm of clapping and cheers. People were standing, their faces shining with genuine emotion. The woman in blue was shouting "Brava," while the gentleman who had been conducting along was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. Maya sat at the piano, her hands folded in her lap, barely able to believe what was happening. She could feel tears on her own cheeks, but she was smiling. In this moment, she wasn't a waitress who had stepped in during an emergency. She was simply a musician who had shared her heart through music, and these people, these wealthy, important people, had heard her. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever. Maya stood from the piano bench and gave a small bow, her legs shaking slightly. The room was a blur of smiling faces and clapping hands, but through her tears of joy, she could see that something magical had happened. These weren't the polite claps of people being kind to a waitress. This was real appreciation, genuine emotion. The event coordinator rushed forward, her clipboard forgotten. "That was incredible," she exclaimed, grabbing Maya's hands. "Why didn't you tell us sooner that you could play like that?" Before Maya could answer, she found herself surrounded by guests. The woman in the blue dress who had been discussing Beethoven earlier pushed her way through the crowd. "My dear," she said, her eyes shining, "I haven't heard playing like that in years. Such passion, such understanding of the music." An older gentleman stepped forward. Maya recognized him as one of the symphony board members. "Young lady," he said warmly, "you've just turned what could have been a disaster into a triumph. But more than that, you've reminded all of us why we're here tonight." He gestured at the room full of donors. "We raise money for music education because we believe in the power of music to transform lives. And tonight, you showed us exactly what that means." The restaurant manager appeared at Maya's side, beaming with pride. "I had no idea," he said, shaking his head in amazement. 3 years you've worked here, and we never knew." "The piano," someone called from the crowd. "How much for the piano?" The event coordinator quickly stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we're auctioning this beautiful instrument tonight to fund scholarships for young musicians." "I'll start the bidding at 50,000, called out the woman in blue. 60,000, countered another voice. The numbers kept climbing, each bid higher than the last. Maya watched in amazement as the price rose far above what they had hoped to raise. These people weren't just bidding on a piano anymore, they were investing in dreams like hers. A tall woman in a deep purple dress made her way through the crowd. Maya recognized her as the dean of the city conservatory. "That was extraordinary," she said quietly. "Tell me, why did you leave music school?" Maya swallowed hard. "My scholarship was cut, and with my grandmother's medical bills." The dean nodded understanding. "And you've been working here ever since?" "Yes, but I never stopped playing." Maya said. Every free moment, even if it was just on my old keyboard at home. That's exactly the kind of dedication we look for, the dean smiled. We have a special scholarship program for returning students. I think you should come see me next week. Bring your grandmother. I'd like to meet the person who helped nurture such talent. Maya's heart felt like it might burst. Around her, the auction continued, the bids reaching astronomical amounts. The event coordinator was crying tears of joy, watching the scholarship fund grow beyond their wildest expectations. One of her regular customers, an elderly man who always ordered mint tea, patted her hand. You see, he said wisely, sometimes life makes us take detours, but they're not always dead ends. Sometimes they're just longer roads to where we're meant to be. Maya looked around the room, at the piano that had changed her life tonight, at her coworkers who were cheering for her, at these wealthy patrons who now saw her as not just a server but as an artist. She thought about all the nights she'd worked here, listening to the music in her head while carrying plates and filling glasses. She hadn't known it then, but every step had been leading her here. The dean handed her a business card. Monday morning, 10 o'clock, she said with a warm smile. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes after the longest pause. Maya clutched the card, knowing that tonight wasn't just an ending to her time as a waitress, it was a beginning. Her dream hadn't died 3 years ago. It had just been waiting, like a song waiting to be played, for exactly the right moment to begin again.